Hi, I'm Patrick Manning at Black Desert Resort. We are proud sponsors of Beyond the Game. I recognize that wins aren't always measured by points. Scoreboards don't always define champions, but the story this athlete has to tell, it does. This is why Black Desert Golf Course is proud to sponsor Beyond the Game to share this inspiring story with you. Please enjoy.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong, and I am happy to be back from Big 12 Media Days. I got back from Las Vegas last night, so it's good to be back in Utah, not having to deal with the 118-degree weather that we had to suffer through there. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with it too much because I was indoors most of the time, but man, that was a sweltering heat. That's something. I can't imagine trying to live through that, but it's hot, yeah. So we're back, and I'm going to give you a breakdown a little bit on what happened at Big 12 Media Days if you haven't already seen, and maybe hopefully give you some other stuff. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about our partner, Black Desert, who is helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. So yeah, Big 12 Media Days, Las Vegas. I think that alone was pretty funny for a lot of Utah fans, especially given the comments that were made once Utah joined the Big 12. So it was an interesting and kind of surreal experience in the sense that the Pac-12 had tried to kind of take over Las Vegas, right? Like they wanted to be able to make that almost the hub of the conference, kind of the central point. Obviously, their championship games were played there in basketball and in football, and so it was just kind of this venue, especially at Allegiant Stadium, where Utah had won back-to-back Pac-12 championships. This was kind of their home away from home, and so to speak. So it was kind of interesting that way that the Big 12 had really taken it over, right? This is a venue now that the Big 12 wanted to own, and it was interesting talking to people there in a different light, and I think there was a lot of people that really enjoyed it. It was a great venue to be able to host a media days type situation. As the Pac-12 kind of came to an end, there were things that it just kind of slipped. There weren't a lot of things that made it easy for us as media to kind of do our job. This one was a little bit easier in some respects to be able to talk to players, but in some ways it was harder as well because they have a situation where outside of the main stage where you talk to the coaches and get questions that way, there wasn't a lot of time to talk to other players outside of, let's say, Utah. And, my main beat obviously is Utah, so I want to talk to them and kind of get their take on things. But I wasn't able to get a chance to be able to talk to a lot of other players or coaches from other teams simply because of kind of the nature of everybody goes at the same time. So it was a little disappointing that way, but all in all, everything was good. Media days are kind of a manufactured thing just to kind of get us to talk about football. And as I was saying with many members of the media down there, there really isn't a ton that comes out of these that is earth-shattering or suddenly your view of the team is different. I think it's more of just kind of a preview of what the season's going to look like, what their optimistic takes are. They're all optimistic most of the time. I don't know that I've heard of a team that's come into media day and just crapped all over the bed, right? Like they're not coming in there saying we suck, we're not going to win any games this year. I don't know why you're following us. of course, every team is going to think that they have a chance at a title. The playoffs are on the docket for every single team, but I don't know. That's just the nature of media days. So take it with a grain of salt. We're still roughly about a month away from hearing about real football in terms of fall camp. Utah should open the last week of July. Those dates have not been fully finalized, at least released publicly. So, we'll get something soon, but we're still a little bit. The Big 12 went first with their media days, and so there's still quite a few shows to go on. Next week, I believe, is the SEC. You've got the ACC, the Big 10, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be some time. Now, before I jump into that, all the kind of stuff that we want to talk about there, Utah had some scheduling news this week. There were a couple games that they scheduled. The first came on Monday, so right before Big 12 Media Days, and that was essentially the battle for the U. That was Utah scheduling a matchup with the University of Miami in Las Vegas. These two teams have never played before. They will meet now in 2027 at Allegiant Stadium. This is a rare non-conference game on a neutral site. Utah doesn't necessarily like to do neutral site games simply because they like, Rice-Eccles Stadium. They like home and home series. They want to be able to showcase their venue and do that. But obviously, if you get a chance to play a team like Miami in Las Vegas, which is essentially Utah's home away from home, you take it, right? This is being sponsored by ESPN Events. This is kind of the marquee game from the Big 12, right? This is one game that they're trying to highlight, and we'll talk a little bit more about what Brett Yormark wants to do with Las Vegas, but this kind of plays into kind of their strategy in trying to build up the quote-unquote entertainment capital of the world and trying to get more there. So that's a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity for Utah, and if it's still a few years out, but I think that'll be fun to be able to have two programs that consider themselves the U, kind of battle it out on the field. And, maybe Mario Cristobal will still be there at Miami. Maybe Kyle Whittingham will be there. He made a comment that he probably doesn't think he will be, but, it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all shakes out and who's available and kind of what these teams look like. It's easy to look at the teams right now and say, oh, this would be a great matchup. But, 3 years from now, either one of these teams could be better, worse. We don't really know. So either way, fun opportunity for Utah to be able to play in that game. And then, a day after Media Day started, Utah announced a scheduling with UCLA. This is a home-and-home series. Utah will go to the Rose Bowl in 2025. And then they will get a return game in 2030, assuming that those contracts stay the same. Sometimes those don't always work, but the main point here is Mark Harlan wants to keep a footprint in Los Angeles, right? You want to be able to have that recruiting base that has always kind of been there for Utah continue, right? You want these guys to be able to say, "Hey, we're going home. We're able to play kind of in your backyard." And then, some of these kids live up in Northern California, so that's not necessarily in their backyard, but it's still California. It still gives you a foothold in that recruiting hotbed. Utah obviously is going to be more in Texas now, and there's other avenues, with Oklahoma and a lot more Midwest type venues that they've been able to kind of attract. But this is a great opportunity for them to maintain a game in Los Angeles, and UCLA is obviously a team that Utah has been able to do well against. That's not to say that they are always beating them, but this is a team that will be fun, right? Like it's now becomes a Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup. That's crazy to say that, but I think you're going to see more of these types of conversations about scheduling some of these games and trying to keep in those recruiting hotbeds. So not much more from that. It is interesting as these schedules take shape. You've got Arkansas, LSU, Wisconsin on the schedule as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. The weird thing about next year, though, is Utah has two road games. You're going to UCLA and you're going to Wyoming if everything stays the same for that non-conference. So usually Utah's pretty well equipped to stay at home, and they don't really do much outside of going maybe one game. But now you get two. What kind of dynamic does that change next year? But that's for another time. We'll probably obviously talk about that next summer. But that's kind of how it goes. So let's go to media days. We're there. So Kyle Whittingham, he shows up, you go from Kyle Whittingham at the college game day where he's got cut off sleeves and, he shows up on a motorcycle and he's kind of that dude. He showed up a little bit more stylish this week. He, showed up with a suit, kind of looked nice, had a clean cut. This is Kyle Whittingham that looked like he's ready to go, right? He's doing and saying all the right things, but he's ready to go out there on the field and pound people, right? Like he wants to go out there and destroy this conference and really own up. And I was impressed in a lot of ways of just kind of his takeaway. In years past, he was always kind of hesitant to fully embrace kind of his status within the conference. That's not to say that he didn't. But I think he also recognized that he's in a conference with USC, Oregon, Washington. There was a ton of teams that on any given day were absolutely going to be a concern for Utah. Even if Utah was the top team and they showed that they were many years in the Pac-12, there were still those teams that were lurking, right? Like you never could kind of shake them. They recruit at a high level. I mean, you're seeing what Oregon is doing in their recruiting this year. There's a very good chance that they could potentially be, the number one recruiting class this year, the way that they're going and Phil Knight's spending that money. But, I think you're seeing this year where he's kind of embracing it a little bit. He's kind of taking it in and saying, this is our year, essentially. This is the year that Utah has a chance to be able to win another conference title, his third in 3 different conferences. He's now got an opportunity to make the playoffs in a way that is far easier than ever. He talked about kind of the fairness of being the playoffs now. It's now just not a committee that's selecting 4 teams. It's now there's some merit in some respects in terms of earning it and being able to win a conference and getting in. I think obviously they didn't win the game in 2019 that would have got them into the playoffs, but I think there's still some of that kind of holdover from the pressure that it was to be able to get there. And there should be pressure, right? Like I'm not saying that Whittingham is dodging that and saying that they were unfairly out because they didn't deserve to be in the playoff. But I think it now comes to a point where it's like if you can win that takes the pressure off a little bit. Even if you don't win the conference, maybe there's a chance you get an at-large bid if you're high enough. And so I think that it's interesting. But I want to kind of start off this conversation just listening to what Whittingham said, just talking about how they're ready to compete. So we'll go with that.
We feel like we've got a roster that's equipped to compete right away. Obviously, I guess the media feels the same way, being picked as the favorite, and I think that's a show of respect to our players and coaches that have done a great job competing through the years that the media has selected as number one. But in the final analysis, that doesn't mean anything. Obviously, you got to play the games, and our players are fully aware of that. But again, it's a nice show of respect for our program from the media.
Kyle's obviously been one to embrace kind of the underdog mentality, right? They don't respect us. They don't want us to be here. The last few years, though, that has flipped, right? As Utah has become kind of that top dog and they've been able to have success and proven it on the field, he's been more adept to kind of owning it. And I think you hear that in his comments on Tuesday that, he's taking it as a sign of recognition for the program. It's an opportunity for them to say, hey, look, even though you're coming into a new conference, we still have value, or you still have value, and the media believes that. And I think he's embracing that. But at the same vein, he's still saying, look, we got to go prove it, right? As any coach should, right? And I don't think outside of maybe Deion Sanders, who, you can talk about Super Bowls and how everybody wants to come to them, yada, yada, yada. This is a coach that recognizes that anything on paper means nothing until you back it up on the field, right? And so I think, they're not going to get too high on these rankings. It doesn't matter if they were picked 7th or 1st, they're going to come in there and they're going to do what they need to compete. So I think that was an interesting thing, though, that Kyle, he's embracing it a little bit more, right? And I think he should. I think if you're coming in as the top team picked by the media, and, you can say what you want about how we pick teams and rankings and yada, 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 the fact that he's embracing that shows kind of that top level. You want to be there, right? Like Georgia doesn't go around saying like, I don't know if we're going to do well. Alabama doesn't say that. No, they expect that. If anything, you lose a game and you're disappointed that you lost that game. That's where Utah is now. I'm not saying they're on the Georgia, Alabama levels. Let's not get that twisted. But this is a team that is now starting to own up to a lot of their high expectations, right? Fans are starting to feel that expectations. You saw that last year where when games were starting to be lost and there was frustrations around how the offense as a whole was kind of functioning, there was a lot of frustrations. It was still an 8-win season, and yet there was a lot of frustration as to where Utah was as a system. So I think, that bodes well for kind of their longevity and kind of their promotion of themselves. And I think this is a good thing for where Utah needs to be. But on the same vein, Kyle couldn't escape the one big question that everybody had. And partly that is due to Utah publicly releasing that Morgan Scalley is the coach in waiting. This is, I've told this to many people before. Like, this is a situation that we had known a long time ago. I think we all had agreed that it's not really worth a story because it was kind of so well known. And then, national media gets a hold of it, and we all had to kind of jump on it. That's not a conversation for today, but it's one of those things that he kind of couldn't dodge. And in the past, he could kind of give one comment and it was done, and nobody's going to talk about it because he's the coach, right? But now he has to talk about Morgan Scalley, which he's fine with because Morgan is, he believes that he's the next guy. But now he has to talk about his, impending retirement. When is it going to be? Every single question that or every media member he talked to and the radio outlets that he talked to, that question got brought up. So it's a distraction to some extent, but I think he handled it well. And I'll kind of I will play a clip that he gave talking about Morgan Scalley as well as kind of what his future timeline looks like.
Well, first of all, Morgan Scalley is an exceptional football coach. He's a proven commodity. He's a Utah guy, played high school ball in the state of Utah, played at Utah, jumped right into coaching at the University of Utah when he was done playing. So he's invested in this program as much as anybody ever has been. He's a guy that knows our culture inside and out. And to me, it's very comforting for when that transition time does occur and it's time for new leadership to have a guy that's going to be able to carry on the values and the cultures that we've put in place. Now, that's not to say he won't put his own stamp on it, because I fully expect that. But I believe that he's the right choice. Now, we have a lot of good coaches on our staff, guys that are going to be head coaches in the near future that are deserving as well. But for this program at this time, Morgan's the right fit. As to when that happens, that's a great question. I take it day by day. I'm as excited and enthused about the season as I've ever been. A lot of that is the excitement about going into a new conference, the new challenge, the new opportunity. But it's just going to be a day-by-day process, and I'm not getting any younger, but at the same time, I feel like I've got a lot of energy right now.
I think that touches on a lot of things. Obviously, his respect for Morgan Scalley, obviously coaching him, coaching along with him. He believes that Morgan is the guy, and we don't need to get into that too much because the future, we don't know when that's going to be. Obviously, a lot of praise has been given to Morgan and kind of his passion and ability to be able to coach, but I think it's more on Whittingham talking about it day by day, right? And I think that's true. Like, I don't think this is him just coming up there and trying to spout something to kind of give somebody a quote. I think this is true. I think for him, these last few years, he's been honest about kind of his approach to it, right? He sees this as a day-by-day situation. Now, that doesn't mean I think he's going to just quit randomly in the middle of the season. I think the wheels would have to fall off. It would have to be a terrible situation for that to happen. I don't foresee that. But even then, I don't think that Kyle's the type of guy to quit midseason. So he says day by day, but I think it's more a season by season thing, right? Like, I think you can start getting into that, whereas the season drags on, maybe you start seeing that on a day by day basis where he starts feeling like it's more of a chore, right? Maybe this isn't where he sees himself in the future. I've heard from several people, whether they're an athlete or whether they're a coach, the day that it starts feeling like a job, that's where it starts kind of, the realization hits that maybe this isn't for you anymore. A lot of these guys stay in it because they're passionate about it, right? They can't see themselves doing anything else. Kyle has always been that way, right? He always has seen himself coaching. He loves to be able to be in that environment. That's why he works those long hours and why he has the passion to continue that. You don't do that unless you have passion, right? You can go find a 9-to-5 job, and yeah, you're not going to be paid as handsome as he is, but you can find a job where you can just put in the hours and call it a day. This is something that they're passionate about. You're working more than 60 hours a week. You're living at that football facility. You have to understand that. And so I think it will come down to a day-by-day decision in that, he's going to take it that way where as the season progresses, if things kind of start building where maybe each day becomes a chore or it feels more like a job, then at the end of the season, you're probably going to see something where he says that. Now, with that being said, and I've said, I could very well see him hang it up after this year, ride it out with Cam Rising and the group that they've got, and hopefully for their sake and, what he hopes, you get the Big 12 championship, you're in the playoff and do respectable in there and maybe compete for a national championship. That obviously is an ideal situation, but there's other things there, right? You've got other players on the roster that he feels passionate about, and does he continue that? And does he continue to move forward, or is this a transitionary period for Morgan Scalley to kind of learn the Big 12 and then kind of let him go? So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think there's anybody that can guess that. I think Whittingham honestly doesn't even know. So it'll be an interesting situation there and kind of how that develops. So outside of that, everything else was pretty much what you'd expect from Whittingham. He's not one to give big answers on kind of like expectations or anything that way. A lot of it is just kind of measured talk about kind of how the season's going to be, who you have on the roster, yada, yada, yada. So there's not some earth-shattering thing there. I do want to point out some of the position groups that he talked about, and we'll get into this a ton as the season starts to begin and, fall camp, and we can talk about these players a little bit more. There hasn't been a ton of change since spring, so it's not like there's this wholesale change that's taken place, and obviously guys have gotten stronger or bigger or yada yada yada, but there's a few position groups that kind of want to touch on. So the first is obviously quarterback, not Cam. Cam obviously is your starter, and they're excited to have him, and there's a lot of conversation about Cam as one could be expected. I can't imagine having to go through all those interviews and talking about the injury and yada yada. I've said yada yada a lot. I got to stop that. You've got a lot of conversations about that, but Cam is the guy. Obviously they want to keep him protected and they want to keep him upright. So you've got that. With that, you've got a battle for the backup, right? And we've seen this as it was late as last year, where if you don't have the right depth, it may not help you, and so you've got to be able to have somebody that you feel comfortable with. And they've got 3 talented guys in there, if not more, that they feel confident about. Kyle said they have a great deal of confidence in where they're at with that backup position. Obviously, in spring, you saw Isaac Wilson and Brandon Rose compete. They had, Kyle said Wilson had a phenomenal spring, said it was great. He picked that up the second half. Obviously, he's got some things to develop and learn, especially with his timing. This isn't high school. Some of those throws that you're able to make in high school, those are going to close much faster, those windows. And so I think that's where Isaac was learning. And so that's kind of where he's at. Brandon Rose, it was kind of recouping from last year's injury, right? He said that he was set back from that so much that he wasn't able to really get into that. I still maintain that Brandon has kind of taken a step back, and Isaac has a leg up on that competition. You saw it in spring. He just looked like the more confident and more fluid and dynamic athlete, but that's not to say Brandon can't be that guy. He's got a big arm. He's been in the system for a long time. He understands it. The question is, can he put it all together? And we'll see. Kyle still calls that a neck-and-neck race between those two. But then you add Sam Heward in there. He comes from Cal Poly, was originally at Washington, comes from a great pedigree of college football, was a 5-star recruit. This is a guy that there was a lot of optimism about. He's got experience, and yes, it was at Cal Poly, but you've seen guys coming in from an FCS level and compete at a higher level and do really well. So I don't know that there's a huge concern that way. It's more for him coming into the system, in the summer, not really understanding it in terms of actually playing. Cam's going out there and the wide receivers are going out there. They're practicing, right? They're doing their own thing, so it's not like he hasn't gotten that. But you're not having this formal, 11 on 11. Getting in the system with Andy Ludwig calling the plays, you're not going to get that until fall. And so I think Kyle is hesitant to say, oh, all of a sudden he's the backup quarterback and we're going to put him in because he hasn't seen how he works in that system. So any expectations that there are about Sam Heward, you kind of have to temper those a little bit, right? I don't think they have to be so quick to this, right? I think because you have Cam, you can worry about that backup race kind of in the background. But at the same time, you have to find somebody that's confident and that can take those second reps. They're not a ton of reps, honestly. So if you get that number 2 reps, that's going to help. But like it's important. I wouldn't be surprised if Heward isn't the guy behind just because of the experience that he has and he can learn the playbook behind Cam and kind of run that. But it's not going to be an easy situation for him. And Isaac especially has done a great job of really putting himself in the system. He's done a great job of kind of establishing himself there. He was here in spring. Ton of upside, obviously, as we've seen. We've seen what he was able to do at Corner Canyon. But you're also putting your future in a freshman, right? If Cam gets hurt, do you have the belief in a freshman quarterback the same way that you would a guy like maybe Sam Heward, who has been at least competing at the college level, even if it is FCS level, you've at least been competing there. Brandon Rose, I don't know that you get any more of an advantage with him versus Isaac other than he has an understanding of the system, but he has to understand that system, right? It's one thing to be able to see it on paper and another to be able to digest it enough to be able to perform it on the field. We saw that last year with quarterbacks. They could see the plays, they understood what they were, but if you're not looking at your reads and you're kind of focusing in on one solo read, it doesn't really work. So we'll see how that goes. That's a battle that I'm really curious to see. I don't think Kyle is going to try to name somebody quickly unless somebody really takes that step up. But to me, kind of the 2 guys to watch there, obviously Sam and Isaac, trying to see how they battle it out. I'm not saying Brandon's not part of that conversation. I just think with his time in the system, if he hasn't gotten it to that point where he's now neck and neck with a freshman, that kind of shows where he's at. But once again, we'll see how that goes. Other updates, Logan Fano, if you remember, he suffered an ACL tear in Oregon State game. He came off, got a sack, and suddenly he came up with the ACL injury. Kyle said he's full go. He's got no limitations, is how he described it. He's been able to go, and any pictures that you've seen that the Utah's tweeting out or putting on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, he's been involved with that. He's taking part in those drills. I think that is a huge thing for Utah. That Utah's obviously got a veteran unit on the defensive line, and they were going to be fine without Logan. But if you can get him in and he is healthy and he's able to kind of keep that same explosive first step and do what he was doing last year, that is huge for Utah. You get somebody that has experience. You get somebody that can get to the backfield, who creates havoc plays. That's going to be a big thing for Utah. And so I think they're excited about that and what they're able to do. You get Van Fillinger, who, if you've looked at any photos, the dude is, I don't know if he's put on like 20 pounds or something, but he's becoming much more chiseled. And I can't imagine trying to go against him and trying to stop him. And hopefully he's healthy as well and in what he's able to do. And I think that the defensive line is going to be, once again, a force to be reckoned with. And there's going to be a lot of success from that position, those position groups. So you got that. One thing that kind of caught me off guard, and I tweeted this, and some people's, they're saying, why should I be caught off guard here? I'm not, in the sense that I don't think this is a concern. I think it's more just, I think there were other position groups that Kyle would have had a question about before this. But I asked him, what position group do you have the most questions about going into fall camp? And the first thing that came to his mind was about the running backs. And I don't think this is that he's concerned about the depth. I think it's more just a concern about who is going to step up, right? You've got Mekhi Bernard, you got Jalen Glover. Those two have been proven guys. They've been able to do things in the system. They get their yards. Mekhi Bernard is honestly one of the best pass protectors on this team. They're fine, right? Like, I don't think there's a situation where Kyle's worried about what the running back situation will look like. I think it's more, do they have one guy that's going to be the quote-unquote bell cow, or do you have it a running back by committee? The last few years, it's kind of been a committee / bell cow when you had Tavion but you've got a lot of depth there where you have guys that, is somebody going to take that next step? Quinton Ganther, in spring, he had talked about no guy has officially stepped up. That's not a bad thing necessarily. It just means there's a lot of guys on that roster that are doing good things. A lot of people like what Mike Mitchell's doing, Dijon Stanley, John Randall, Charlie Vincent. I know, he's a walk-on, and there's some, for whatever reason, because a kid is a walk-on, people kind of use that as a way like, why are we talking about him? But there's been a lot of talk about him since spring, and he's really made some progress, and obviously he's gotten some reps over the years. Quinton Ganther talked about how he's trying not to give him the ball. That's what you do with walk-ons. You're trying not to give them the ball. They have to prove it. That's not to say anybody else doesn't have to prove it, but I think they have to work harder. And yet Charlie continues to demand that, right? Like he continues to do things on the field that allows him to be able to get the ball. So I think there's enough guys in this room, and I think that kind of shows the expectations that Utah has where that becomes the concern, right? They're talking about running backs as a concern, maybe not a concern, as a question, simply because they have such a high level of expectation there. With an offense that has continually grown and improved, if you don't have an effective run game, what does that mean for Utah, especially for a Utah program that has usually relied on the run first? So I don't think there's concern here by any means. I don't think Kyle used that as a way to say that this is a tough situation. I think it's more just the growing status of what this offense is trying to do, right? They want somebody to step up. They want a lead guy. You want somebody to be able to be a 1,000-yard rusher. It's much easier that way than having a bunch of guys rush for 400 yards each, and having that. That still works, and he's not afraid of that. He said if they do it running back by committee, he's okay with it, but I think it's just kind of how will that shake out. So Mekhi Bernard obviously becomes the guy that is kind of the favorite there, Jalen Glover as well. But there's a bunch of guys in there that'll kind of get in that mix, and I'm curious to see how it goes. So outside of that, wide receiver depth, tight end depth, Kyle said the tight ends are maybe as good as he's ever seen at Utah in his time. I think that's probably true. You obviously get Brant Keithy back. You get Landon King, Carson Ryan. You got some other guys in that system that are going to produce. This becomes another great tight end room that is able to be effective. At wide receiver, you bring in Dorian Singer. You get some other guys that come in there. They're blanking my name all of a sudden, even though it was right there a second ago. You get these guys that are going to be able to compete. In theory, this is a group that should probably be the best in Kyle Whittingham's tenure, on paper at least. And I think that shows good things for them. So I don't know. I think this is a lot of good from what Kyle says. I don't think he's blowing smoke. I think they genuinely believe that this offense is going to be capable of doing a lot of great things. Cam Rising, I believe it was Brant Keithy, I can't remember, talked about how they may surprise people, right? And considering that the last time those two players were on the field, they averaged about 38 points per game. I mean, that's saying something, right? They were doing some good. They were near the top in a lot of offensive categories, and I think if they can continue to kind of showcase that could be a very dangerous team, especially with the defense that Utah always has and being able to limit teams. So we'll see how that goes. All of this is still on paper. All of this is still speculative. You could talk to any team at the Big 12 Media Days, and they'd probably have similar comments about their team and how everybody's improved and how everybody is so much better. So take that for what it's worth. Now, let's go to Cam Rising. Cam Rising, he, just watching Cam, I chuckle because it's just kind of fun to watch Cam. Yeah, he comes into these things and he just has this swagger where he just like owns the place, right? Even last year when he was, coming off an ACL injury and the questions were, was he going to play? You had Caleb Williams in the conference. You had Michael Penix Jr. in the conference. Cam still came in there with that swagger like he owned the place, and that's just who he is. He has so much confidence in himself and his ability, but in kind of a humble way, right? Like he's not out there kind of touting himself as God's greatest gift to earth, but he comes out there with this swagger and confidence that many people believe in him. And so when he makes comments or does different things, I kind of laugh because it's just kind of fun to watch. I love that aspect of football. I don't care what team it is. I love being able to do that or see that and be able to kind of see how this works. And so Cam had some fun with it. And obviously, because BYU and Utah are now in the same conference, Cam got asked questions about BYU. And if you remember, Cam was on the sideline for the BYU game in which Utah lost at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. He wasn't made the starter at that point. 2 games later, he was made the starter officially and obviously has done really well at Utah. But this is now his opportunity to be able to play the rival. And, he's asked that. And in the media session with us, he gave an easy answer.
I just want to go down there and whoop their ass pretty much. That's all I'll focus on.
That's as simple as it is. He got a lot of social media attention from national media who obviously had fun with that. Then the video surfaced of him on BYU Sports Nation talking about how he hates BYU. He was blunt. He told them he just doesn't want to see the Y logo. He doesn't want to do anything related to that. When he sees it, he kind of gets upset about it. This is a guy that is owning up to the competitiveness, and he wants to be able to spark that controversy, right? And admittedly, on Twitter, people get into that debate and they fall for it, right? They see that Cam has kind of stirred the pot a little bit and has kind of come in there and thrown some bombs. My favorite rebuttal to that, though, was Connor Pay. He's the center for BYU. He said he didn't have a problem with it, right? He said Cam should be talking like that. He should be wanting to compete. He should be wanting to come out there and kick their butt. So this is kind of the fun, right? We're going to see this. There's going to be a bye week before that BYU Utah game, and that'll be our next opponent that we talk about next week when I get back to that. But this is going to be fun. It was Junior Tafuna that says, with that extra bye week, we'll go to church and then we'll go battle it out on the field the next week. So it's fun. I'm excited to kind of see some of those conversations happen again when they weren't in the same conference. Obviously, it was kind of more muted. There wasn't a lot. There was still hate, don't get me wrong. But there wasn't the fun of poking at your rival and doing that. And, Utah would expect the same from BYU, and BYU should expect the same from Utah. And, everybody wants to call it locker room fodder. I think it's just more Utah feels very confident in where they're at, and that doesn't mean that they'll win that game, but I think they feel confident with where they're at and where BYU's at, and they want to go in there and prove something, right? And so this will be interesting. Cam is he's going to have fun with it. I don't know that he's going to give many more quotes like that before the game, but I think he's ready. He wants to play that game, and we'll see how it goes. So with that, one more thing related to Utah, and we'll just talk a few more other things to close this episode out. There's a lot at Big 12 Media Days, so I don't want to bore you with everything, but we got a chance to talk to Mark Harlan. Mark Harlan gave us a bunch of different updates on things. It was kind of surreal because he pointed out that he was standing in the spot where Devin Lloyd scored a touchdown after picking off Anthony Brown in the Pac-12 championship game. Obviously, an iconic moment in Utah history. It really kind of cemented that game for Utah. That was the moment, especially I thought that Utah was going to win that game. I'm not alone in that, so it's not like some earth-shattering thing. But it was interesting to have him speaking there, but now in a different conference and talking about different things. And there's been a lot going on in this offseason, not quite like last season where it was conference realignment, although you could argue that there's been some people taking the Florida State and Clemson conversations about them joining the Big 12 as kind of that. So that's neither here nor there. We're not going to get into that. But this summer, there's been a lot of conversations related to paying players. It's mostly related to a lawsuit. It's called the House Case. And the NCAA essentially came up with a settlement offer that they would agree to pay players, a certain amount every single year, roughly $20 million to start that first year that they do it. That comes out of the athletic budget, their revenue. So it's essentially schools paying players. Now that has to be distributed to all of the athletes. That can't just be for football, and universities can figure out how they want to distribute that. I think there has to be a base level for each player, but I can't remember. So it's there's a lot of aspects there, and it's still fully not settled. So there's some questions there. But we asked Mark about that. He gave his answer. It's a little long answer, but it kind of shows kind of what the athletic department is fixated on right now and kind of how they're going to approach this situation.
Well, first of all, we're all in on it, right? I mean, you give us a chance to provide resources to student athletes, we're going to do it. So we're excited about being at full distribution. We don't know how it's all going to be divided up. We got time to figure all that out. I'm excited about some of the clarity that's in the settlement, right? So we can now use our own operating funds pursuant to the settlement, which, by the way, still has to be ratified and go through all the motions of that. But we're preparing for it. We're excited about it. I think the other thing that I'm thinking about is what's going to be on top of that, right? We know name, image, and likeness stays, right? True NIL, which has been the hope for the last 2 years. It necessarily hasn't been the case, but we're seeing possibility of further compliance, real compliance. So I think in Salt Lake we have a great opportunity to have a lot of corporations still involved in an authentic way to go even above and beyond. But if you look at the 22% of revenue, which will be $20 million in year one, along with scholarship, room, books, and board, you're talking about almost 45 to 48% of our revenue going to student athletes. And that's awesome, and that's remarkable. And I think that will eventually get to Congress as proof that we're doing the right stuff now. And maybe we'll get, kind of more standardized state-to-state rules, which would be helpful.
As he said, they expect to be at full distribution. Schools have to have a baseline, I believe, but they don't have to go up to the full 20 million, if I remember right. So there's certain facets of this that'll be there. Brett Yormark talked about how he's not going to dictate it from a Big 12 standpoint. That'll be based on the individual schools and kind of what they want to do. I'm curious to look at a school like Arizona and kind of what they're going to do, especially with all their athletic budget problems and kind of what goes on there. But this is going to be a new world where players are being paid by the universities. They're not quite fully ratified as employees yet, but they essentially are, and that opens up a whole new world of how that works. If you are employees, there's a chance that you can fire them, right? Like a coach could say, we're not going to keep your contract through the end of the season. There opens up a whole bunch of problems with this, and you talk about collective bargaining agreements. That's above this podcast's head, I guess. We're not going to get into that unless we have to, but it's a situation that is going to be something that everybody has to focus on and understand, because this is going to change that. And as part of that, you have currently the Crimson Collective, that is kind of the NIL house for Utah. Like he said, that's going to change. You can't necessarily do it the same way because now the athletic department is paying for it. The way NIL was truly meant to be is more on the marketing side, right? Like you're getting an opportunity to be able to get money by appearing in a commercial like Cam Rising has done, and you get that off of your name, or you're being in the video games or different things that way. It's turned into essentially a pay-for-play lately, and you see Phil Knight throwing cash around lately and really just trying to get players in. That's going to change, and I'm curious to see how that all shakes out. But right now there's still not enough answers. Above all that, though, Harlan said they're not cutting funding at the University of Utah. That includes cutting programs. They're not going to just suddenly say, okay, the women's volleyball team, you're gone because we need to pay the football team. One, they can't do that. There's Title IX restrictions there, but also, that's not their plan, right? He said that they're all in. They're continuing to move forward. They're going to try to find new ways to get revenue, similar to how the Big 12 is trying to find more ways to get revenue. That's not to say Utah will explore private equity or different things that way, but there's going to be opportunities for them to be able to try to find more revenue that they haven't been able to tap into. And part of that is they're going to be hiring a chief revenue officer. This is a person that's going to be in there focusing on the day-to-day, money and kind of trying to find ways to be able to bring more money into Utah. This isn't necessarily donor-driven. This is more trying to find more marketing, more corporate sponsors, more things that way to be able to bring money to the athletic department. I'm curious to see how that develops and what that will mean. Brett Yormark is very intent on kind of growing these things and the marketing side of things. And so I think there is one big push there from the Big 12 where this becomes an opportunity for them to be able to kind of look at that and kind of get more revenue that way. On top of that, they're going to try to find more ways to be able to get into, teams into Rice-Eccles Stadium and trying to get more opportunities into Rice-Eccles Stadium and and being able to kind of grow that. He talked about wanting to be able to, expand different aspects of it. The north side video boards, trying to fix that. They want to be able to come up with some solutions to help with kind of the congestion, especially in that area where there's the tracks, the north end zone. I had to walk down there one time to be able to go get something, and it's a madhouse. I've never really had to experience that before because I'm in the press box, but there's some real concerns there, right? There's concerns about Rice-Eccles Stadium and how they move forward with that. And he's intent on doing that. And he doesn't have a full say in that. It's a facilities question, and the president's office has to deal with that as well. But I think all of these kind of combine with how do we get players here? How do we pay them? How do we bring more revenue here? How do we upgrade the facilities? Because Rice-Eccles is a great venue for them. They value it. They want people to be there. So it's kind of different things that way. On top of that, how does the growth of downtown impact them, right? He talked about having conversations with Ryan Smith and that new entertainment district that they want to put down there. What does Utah's role, if any, what is it, essentially? Like, are they going to have a role in it? He said, maybe in 10 years, there's a chance that there could be dorms down in downtown, or there could be kind of satellite sites down there where you have people that can come into part of the University of Utah that is in the downtown area to kind of build up that area. Regardless, all of these things, he says, help Utah grow. And I think you're seeing that as long as football continues to grow, as long as all these other sports continue to grow, that generally means good thing for Utah. The revenue is able to come. People want to pay. There's access. Those things matter. So it's kind of interesting to see how that will all develop. What they're planning to do, but there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding it, right? Like, how are these players paid? Excuse me. How do they get more revenue? How does this all shake out? Those questions will kind of answered in the coming years. And I know some people look at this as a bad thing for college sports. I don't. I personally, you can hold on to the amateurism and different things that way, but I think it's more that this is just the landscape of it, and I understand the purity of it, and everybody has problems with it, but just embrace it. And I'm not going to tell you how to think, but I think if you embrace it, I think that's it's a fine situation and it's fun. So outside of that, real quickly, just a few other things. If you got a chance to listen to this, Mike Gundy, the Oklahoma State coach, he's getting a lot of publicity this week, just not for the right reasons. As you may know, their star running back, Ollie Gordon, he was arrested for DUI. He hasn't necessarily denied it. The university is not denying it. It's not a question of that. The legal limit in Oklahoma is 0.8, and he came in at a 1 or something. I can't remember what it was. He essentially, he was intoxicated. He had open containers in his car. It was not a good situation, especially in light of an Oregon player who is now in the NFL dying because of a suspected DUI, not from them, but from somebody hitting them. And so it was a tough situation to kind of have that. And there's a lot of situations with cars lately. Georgia, even today, had more people arrested due to reckless driving and speeding and everything. And this is a situation that concerns a lot. But Mike Gundy came in with a tone-deaf comment. He was talking to ESPN, and he talked about how Ollie's not going to face any consequences. He's not going to, miss any time in that terms of consequences. I don't know if there's any other situations that they're going to have. I doubt it based on kind of how this goes. But he came in there and he told ESPN his rationale for why he didn't do anything for Ollie. And I'll read a little bit of this. You can go listen to it. But he says, I thought to myself 2 or 3, maybe 4 beers, and I'm not justifying what Ollie did. I'm telling you what decision I made. I thought, okay, I've probably done that 1,000 times in my life, and it was just fine. So I got lucky. People get lucky. Ollie made a decision he wishes he could have done better, but when I talked to Ollie, I told him, you're lucky you got out light because you make a lot of money to play football. So back in the day, being able to cover the cost of what he's going to go through would be difficult for a college player. It's not for him. Now, I'm not speaking for him, but saying that's not an issue for him, so nobody got hurt. there's so much there, and I'm not going to get into it fully, but I think this is 100% a tone-deaf conversation. One, admitting that, you're driving under the influence 1,000 times, but then saying because he's a football player, he doesn't really have to speak or answer to these issues. That there's a lot of problems with that, right? I'm not going to sit here and kind of go over this forever, but I think, there's a real aspect of sports where when these guys aren't held accountable, it kind of snowballs and more athletes do these things that could put people at risk. People lose their lives over this situation. And so for Mike Gundy to kind of come out there and really not own up to it is tone deaf and not a great look for the university, but he's been doing these types of things for years, right? He's saying these types of things, and it's not good. He later tried to clarify on Twitter that he was trying to just talk about kind of his rationale of how people make mistakes, and he's not trying to judge Ollie for it. You can say what you want, but at the end of the day, you came out there and maybe admitted that you've done something. Either way, you're not taking ownership for it. You're not putting it on him. The NFL has a policy that they would be suspended for 3 games, and yet he's not going to face anything. The one thing that they said is they brought Ollie to media days, and it was mostly Ollie's choice to be able to do that, to be able to answer for that and not kind of let his his teammates answer those questions. But then Gundy went once again and said, if anything, the punishment will be, running the ball 50 times in the season opener. I don't know that's a punishment. I mean, I know, whatever. But, that was probably the biggest trending story from Big 12 Media Days outside of anything that Deion says, and I'm not going to get into that today. But it shows that, there needs to be some serious talks around these things in college. Look, college kids, they're going to make mistakes. I get that, right? Like, we're all young and we all do those things. I'm not saying DUIs or anything like that, but we all do make mistakes. But for them to not hold him accountable, I think shows kind of how unserious they are about it and not really taking it in a way that is going to help the narrative around athletes and kind of their privilege in life. So, interesting situation. Outside of that, Brett Yormark, obviously, he's an entertainer. He had his comments that he gave at the beginning of Big 12 Media Days. He talked about the Big 12 being one of the top 3 conferences in the country. Obviously, that's a shot fired at probably the ACC, which is going to contend with that. I think he was doing that before with the Pac-12, and now he's kind of taking aim at the ACC. And I don't know the full intentions on that, other than he really believes that they are a top 3 conference, and he should, right? He should feel like his conference is in a good and positive light, and they want to grow and continue to do it. But he called it, "We will be the deepest conference in America. Every week will matter. We have star power and parity." And, he truly believes that. There's a lot of parity in this. There's a lot of deepness to the conference. And I tend to agree with that. I think there's a lot of teams that can compete for a Big 12 title, and it is really anyone's guess. We saw that in the Pac-12 a few years where it was anybody's guess, and it kind of caused some problems for the conference in the sense of the playoffs, and they weren't able to get to where they needed to. So there's not quite that same issue because you do get a guarantee spot in the playoff, but for the team trying to look for maybe an at-large bid, trying to get a second one, if there is a lot of parity and your teams are losing because, on any given week a team can lose, that doesn't help your situation. If you're coming into those playoff conversations and you're, a 3 or 4 loss team trying to get in outside of the champion, it doesn't help. So I'm curious to see how that goes. I'm curious to see how those comments go over next week with the ACC and other conferences. I mean, I think the SEC and Big Ten are they don't care enough, but at the same time, college football is an interesting situation where they care, and you'll hear probably some comments about that, and we'll see. I don't know. Beyond that, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about private equity and corporate sponsorships at the Big 12, talking about naming it the All-State 12. He didn't get into any of that. There were no conversations related to that, other than, he continues to say that the Big 12 is open for business. They're going to do whatever that mean. In the past, that had kind of meant open for business in terms of bringing teams in, but it's always kind of had that double meaning of we're going to do whatever we can to try to find revenue. They're trying to close that gap that the SEC and the Big Ten have in the revenue that they're getting from their networks. And so they're trying to do whatever. But he says, their top priority is growth and creating value for our member institutions. They're going to do whatever they can to grow that. He calls them a mature startup, which means the brand can be younger, more progressive, innovative, and compared to some of the other peers in the country. So he says they're essentially exploring all options. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. They are in deep conversations with Allstate to be able to change the name. He's trying to push for corporate sponsor patches on official jerseys. He doesn't, he's not talking about putting those on the team jerseys, just more for the officials of the Big 12. But he's looking at anything, any way that you can squeeze money out of somebody to get more money for the programs there, the better that is. They're doing things to be able to help on-field stuff, like signing a deal with Microsoft to be able to get tablets on the field, similar to what you see in the NFL. They want to make this a destination where the game of football, especially, rivals that of, I'm not going to say the NFL, but you want to kind of make it a closer similarity to that with the on-field tablets and the different things that way that are going to come out there. He also talked about wanting to expand a little more in the West and kind of growing up that base there. He said Las Vegas is critically important to the conference, and it was that before even the Four Corner schools joined. He wants to still have his mainstay in Dallas, where they're headquartered. They have their conference tournaments in Kansas City, but he wants to find a balancing act to be able to get more into Las Vegas. And what that looks like, he didn't point out. He said it's still conversations that they have to have, but he doesn't want to just go with tradition, right? Just because it's always been played at Jerry World or it's always been played in Manhattan, Kansas, he wants to be able to kind of use those as ways to say, okay, we're still going to have that identity, but maybe there's other areas where we can get to Vegas. He specifically pointed out several student athletes came up to him and said they loved being in Vegas. What college kid probably doesn't want to be in Vegas, if we're being honest. But I think they're trying to do whatever they can to continue to raise the profile of the Big 12, even if it's just an entertainment value, right? He's been in the entertainment business. He understands what that means. He wants to be able to grow it that way. So we'll see what that ends up being. But just know that Brett Yormark, he's going to continue to be the guy that pushes new boundaries that may backfire on him, right? Like we've seen that happen with a Larry Scott or others that have tried to kind of dream too big and then it doesn't work out. The college landscape continues to change on a daily basis, it feels like, but any of these things could change. So I'm curious to kind of see how this all shakes out, but he's going to continue to push and move forward with that. So that's, honestly, there's a lot to talk about at Big 12 Media Day, but those are kind of the highlights that I saw. I'm sure we'll get into more of the conversations that were around this, but we're getting close. Football season is around the corner, and we'll get more into the conversations about that and doing everything that way. So we'll kind of have more talks about that, but next week we'll return to breaking down the schedules. We're almost done with Utah's season. We're going to move on to BYU and Colorado, and we'll kind of continue that through and lead up to fall camp, where we will move forward and talk about that. So thanks for listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast, and we will get back to you again next week. Thanks.